So first things first, I will just be giving a brief introduction to ethics and bias regarding AI, and really just trying to spread awareness about it being an actual issue. And if you like, I will be having a poll a little bit later on, so to keep yourself awake, you can scan the QR code and get involved. It would be really cool to see what everybody in the audience is thinking with regards to the, I think they're interesting questions that I will be asking. So, in terms of protecting machines from us, not the other way around, it seems like ethics and bias is an issue, right? And it's kind of strange because ethics and bias is what makes us human, right? It's part of why we are who we are, and yet it seems to be a problem. So I would like to address why I might think this is a problem, especially for the tech community. And then I'll move on to unintentional and intentional maliciousness, so how we're bad. And why being bad is bad, because that needs justification. And then what we can do about it. So I'm going to make the broad generalization that most of the people in this room are computer nerds. And if we look at historical data with regards to computer nerds, there's a couple of generalizations out there, especially on the interwebs, about what and who we are. And one of these is a reputation for not really taking the world very seriously. And what do I mean? Well, we have things like peer-to-peer networks, which allow people to steal files, things like movies, allowing people to steal movies without the repercussions of the fact that it's illegal. We have this reputation of being hackers for good and bad reasons. And we've also kind of made this community that only we really understand, and we've kind of kept other people out. And we have inside jokes like putting sushi recipes into something that everybody thinks is really cool and sophisticated. And moving on to the next generalization, the computer nerd industry isn't particularly well recorded as being very diverse. This is a Google search entry of computer nerd, hence the results. And then the third point is that computer nerds are socially inept. Which is quite awkward when it comes to conferences because we're all supposed to talk to each other. And as a result, we're not very popular. Growing up, might have been bullied and taken advantage of. And this is part of the reason why we have felt the need to create this world and not necessarily respect the popular culture and the rules required within that popular world and what it means. But times are changing, right? We're taking over the world now. And generalizations do not apply as much as they did before. So, I mean, if we're looking at money as a marker of success, the richest person in the world, Amazon, second richest person in the world, Microsoft. Then there's this guy who's pretty much a celebrity. People even care about what happens in his private life and who he's dating and things like that. And so now we have this amazing power to change the world, a new responsibility. And this is really great because we have really amazing ideas and there's all sorts of things that we want to change, and it's super cool and it's super lovely. But along with having change is there's a will or an intention, right? And we can classify intentions into good and bad intentions, right? And I might suggest that there's more opportunities for bad intentions than there are for good. So if we're looking at how actions match intentions, we have good intentions and good actions, as represented by the nice green circle, and we have bad intentions and thus sequential bad actions. But in the case where we have good intentions and sometimes we make a mistake and that means a bad action, we kind of have this conglomerate of things that make bad things happen, you know? And so we realize then with the increased probability of things going really wrong that we have this great power of being able to change the world as computer nerds, but also that we have a lot of responsibility, as is said by Uncle Ben, Spider-Man, yay. And yes, we realize that our actions have consequences. And now that our technologies are reaching more and more people, influencing more and more lives, this responsibility is a really huge responsibility. And we can't stuff it up because we've been given the chance to show the world that nerds are really cool, right? And so there's two dangers. one of the dangers is creating machines with unintentional maliciousness, so making mistakes, right? Bad action from good intentions. I think that's what this is. And the second of those is machines built with malicious intent, right? And the reason why this is particularly important is not only by keeping this in mind do we protect humans and the future of the human race, but it also protects machines. AI has gone through a number of what is called AI winters because it loses popularity and people lose faith in it. And if we do not want people to lose faith in what AI is able to offer now, then it means we need to take these things into account to protect it from us and all the bad qualities that humans have. We need to keep it away from the AI. Okay, so what is unintentional maliciousness? What I have given an acronym. The first instance of this is called an evil genie. And I was trying to think up of an analogy to try and explain this. And so in the book, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, there's this really amazing AI entity, and they ask it, what is the answer to life? And it responds, 42. And it's quite underwhelming. And the reason why is because there was unintentional consequences to the questions that they made. And this is often the case in terms of AI technologies, is that we do not necessarily think about all the possible outcomes of the technologies we create, and therefore we're unable to predict what that means for the society that we're in. And then the second of these is with regards to bias. And bias is given as a disproportionate weight assigned to a certain feature. And this kind of, in most cases, results in something that is unfair. And we have things like data-weighted bias. Jade gave us an example yesterday of a classification algorithm where they were trying to determine wolves or dogs or something. And they're like, yes, algorithm works. But the algorithm wasn't actually looking at the wolves. It was looking at the background, at the snow. There was an unweighted, a disproportionate bias on the snow. And that is not the important feature that the system was trying to look at. So that's one kind of bias, which leads to mistakes, which, remember, is bad. Same WhatsApp group. And the second of those is societal weighted bias, and this is the one that everybody's going crazy about at the moment, well, at least in my micro community of people who care about it. And so these range of things like age, class, gender, disability, social, sexual orientation, race, politics, and the list goes on and on and on. And it basically takes human characteristics, groups people into minorities, and then discriminates those minorities, and it makes it really difficult. And so in terms of machine learning, I know we're at a deep learning conference, and so to think of bias is a little bit confusing because bias is supposed to be that thing that goes with weights, and it's not the same one. In this case, bias is a weight. And if you would like to think of it that way, then it would mean your bias within your deep learning network is more like, it's a threshold, right? So it's kind of like privilege, but we won't go into that. So why is unintentional maliciousness bad? Well, firstly, as I've stated, evil genies result in mistakes, and mistakes are bad because we don't want to make mistakes. And the second of these is with bias, and results from bias is discrimination and exclusion. And exclusion and discrimination sucks when you are the target of that discrimination and exclusion. It also sucks if you care about the people who are the targets of that discrimination. And okay, maybe you might not care about the people, but perhaps you care about sustainability. So within a social context, there are enough people who care about the people who are the targets that it leads to social instability, and therefore the instability of the current social context. So if you're benefiting from the current social context, it's not sustainable to stay that way because everybody will just protest against it, and that context will collapse, which sucks for everybody. And then, okay, fine, maybe you don't care about society, but maybe you care about yourself. And an important part of not being discriminative and of not being a cause of exclusion is that you want to stay relevant. If you or your business and your machine learning ideals are not relevant to the current context because you've not taken the above into account, then you lose relevance and you are no longer relevant, and thus your ego suffers. So hopefully I've been able to convince you in some way that caring about bias is important. Oh yeah, and then the last point is not all bias is bad, actually. There are cases in the past where a current bias, a historical bias, has led to a certain level of inequality, in which case bias is necessary in order to level that out. An example of that in South Africa, for example, is affirmative action. And so you say to me, okay, yes, now I understand what this means, but is unintentional maliciousness really that bad? And so to give you a few examples, this was really recent, last month. Stanford launched the Institute of Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence. And the mission of this, by the creators, was that AI must be broadly representative of humanity, right? That was the mission of this committee. And there's 120 members listed in this. Not a single member is Black or Native American. This is Stanford. Another example, which is a bit more local, this man is called Emerald Van Zyl, and he's managed to recover more than 223 million from financial institutions by helping over 1,500 homeowners. Why, you may ask? And it's because it's been found that banking institutions have been ripping off many Black South Africans, systematically and illegally overcharging them. So for example, this is a case study. A man with a bond, initially 70,000 Rand, earning 6,000 Rand a month. So now he's under debt review because he doesn't earn so much and he can't really pay back his bond in time. His interest rate is upped from 9.3% to 18%, that's double, when the prime interest rate, so if you're a good behaving South African who has a good credit record and you can pay back your bond in time, is 10%. So this is double that prime rate to a person who clearly can't afford it. And so here we have a class discrimination, and because of our historical context, this class discrimination turns into racial discrimination, which again leads to social instability, and remember, that sucks for everyone, okay? So just to further drive the point home, I have a few examples from the international community. So here's a thing about Compass, which is an algorithm that was being used to help the judicial system in the US, okay? So the system was being used to determine bail, it was used to determine jail time, who was going to be convicted and not, and whatever. So for example, here are two suspects. One is Richard Borden, the other one Vernon Parker. And we might unanimously agree which of these would have a higher risk considering their history, right? We're data people, we understand that one of these has a higher risk than the other. But it was found that the person who hasn't committed any further crimes has a higher risk than the person that does. Why? Because of a racial bias. And this is a system that has been used for a couple of years, so a lot of people have been convicted as a result of this. Another example, 2018, last year, October, Amazon was using a recruiting engine. You might look at these two examples and you're like, well, it's kind of difficult to choose between the two. I would kind of need a little bit more information, not the recruiting engine. Because Cedar Crest College is a women's only university, and therefore this person would be discarded in the recruitment process because data people and engineering people, we've already established the nerd industry hasn't been very representative. Using that historical data and applying that to the current social context means that women are disregarded in that selection process. Offense, gender bias. And then another interesting one, which is October 2017, police in Israel arrested and interrogated a Palestinian worker based on a picture that he posted of himself on Facebook with the following caption. I'm not sure if anybody can read the caption in this room, but when you use Facebook to translate this caption, it turns into hurt them. In Hebrew, attack them, which can be problematic given the political climate of that region. And do you think it was a rightful arrest? No, it was not a rightful arrest. Arabic for good morning and attack them are very similar, and Facebook's automatic translation software chose the wrong one. Offense here, political bias. Okay, so bias is a problem, yes, we know. But that is something that creeps into our things, and something maybe we will talk about how to deal with that later. But we also have the problem of intentional maliciousness. And this is with regards to ethics, right? And ethics can be defined as rules of behavior based on ideas about what is morally good or bad. And this is kind of complicated because trying to decide what is morally good or bad is really difficult. But just to further drive the point home, here's my deep learning analogy. So if you have a binary cross-entropy function for your deep neural network, this is kind of what ethics is about, where your y true is your ideal morals and your y predicted is yours, and you kind of have to update them to match what is socially acceptable. And why is intentional maliciousness bad? And to be honest, I don't know. I could not come up with a rational reason as to why I should not kill the little mouse that lives in my kitchen. It just kind of feels bad in this area when I think about it. Sometimes in this area. And I can kind of associate it, and generally we associate it to it being to do with social wellness. This is why you don't go around lying to people and killing people, because you want to maintain social cohesion. And it's important for the proliferation of the human race. We're still biological beings, and we have instincts, and we kind of do this thing so that there's more of us, like all the other living beings on the planet. So if we are now using emotions in our decision-making process, then we can ask ourselves the question, and here you can join me on the app if you feel like it. Should AI be purely rational? There's been a very large discussion about rationality and what that means in terms of machines, and there's some argument saying that yes, we need rationality because emotions get in the way of decisions. But how often do emotions really get in the way of decisions? Quentin was talking about earlier about the mother that would choose the less desired path, and I think one of the biggest AI controversies within movies was Hell in Star Wars, where he chose the mission over his fellow spaceship driving mates. He killed them out of sacrifice for the mission. So I hope this works. It was giving me trouble earlier. Oops. Ooh. So yeah, B, no. Should not be purely rational. Interesting. Okay, so are we too reliant on technology and social media? Which aspects are influenced most by overuse? So addiction, mental health, relationships, communication, global economy, in terms of how these social media companies are using us and our emotions and what we feel about each other and ourselves in order to make money. It is a capitalist world, yes, but is this okay? And I think this is particularly important because a lot of the technologies we use do not come with warning labels. Cigarettes come with warning labels. They tell you you'll get cancer. But that doesn't happen along with a lot of the technologies that we use and integrate into our lives and allow to take over our lives. B, relationships and communication. I assume that means in a positive sense, not a negative one, because we want to be positive, yay. Another one, when is enhanced human classified as a robot and therefore no longer human and no longer entitled to the current Bill of Human Rights? When they have artificial basic organs of social capabilities, so they can do the X-ray thing and see you naked, or artificial brain function, processing speed, quantity, memory. Assuming that this would not be available to everyone in the population, right? Brain transplant into a robot body. All of the above are entitled to human rights. And yeah, D, all of the above. Oh. Next question. So the next question, while this thing is loading, is in terms of job security, and that has been a really large concern, not just in the world, but also has been a common reoccurring theme at this conference. And it's, we know that AI will take a lot of jobs. At the same time, it will probably provide a few, not enough to overcome the jobs that it overtakes. But if AI is able to influence job loss, then, and it creates wealth, right? Then who is entitled to that wealth? The companies who own the rights to the technology, so the big corporations, the Amazons, the Googles, and the rest of us are just like, I have no job, I have no money. Is it the minority who produced it? so including a small distribution of that wealth, or everyone, regardless if you were involved in the production or not. You guys are so nice. There's hope for the rest of the world. Okay. And in terms of privacy and surveillance, and this one's also a really difficult one, because yes, we all want our personal privacy, and privacy is especially important, and we have a whole lot of acts protecting user privacy of technologies, but what about social security? If you have a system that is able to detect a serial murderer as he runs around the street and the camera catches his face and they're like, yes, he's there, go get him. Will that really benefit society at the same time that it won't? So which one would you choose if you had the option? Privacy. This is also a terrible question. So Russian weapons maker Kalashnikov, a very famous name, announced earlier this year, I think this was actually last year, sorry, that's incorrect, about developing an artificial intelligence machine capable of targeting and firing at humans. Don't worry, it learns from its mistakes, so it gets better. But considering the harsh climates and political climates around the world, we have a number of countries who refuse to let go of their nuclear heads, and if we're trying to protect ourselves from those countries, or if there's an alien invasion, should we be able to have automatic weapons that are able to protect us from adversaries? And if we limit ourselves to access to these weapons, what stops our adversaries from creating them themselves? So, yeah, these are really difficult questions, but it's unanimous. Everyone thinks they should be banned. Last question. So the train can't stop, and this is a very common ethics question. And do you think, and you are the person in the middle there, right? Should you pull the lever to divert the train from hitting the 5 people? Or should you decide the fate of this one person and make the train change its place and kill him instead? Ethics, right? It's tough to think about. And it's really interesting. Yeah, that seems to generally be the case. And all around the world, there's a cool ethics tool where you can go and do a whole lot of these little tests. And they're using it to do a study on ethics around the world. And yeah, nobody agrees. So we've looked at bias and we've looked at ethics, and we might agree that machines by themselves, right, as they are, as they stand, before we interfere with them, are completely non-biased and are completely ethical, right? And it is only until we give those machines data, maybe that is biased data, or that we change the model of that machine to achieve a particular outcome, that we are then inputting what we believe into the system, and then the system becomes ruined, right? So in this case, yeah, we have our data, which is how we can change them, and we have the model and the questions that we ask and require of this model that's able to change it. But this means that there are 2 places in which we can interfere in terms of making sure that our systems do all right, and that they're doing the right thing. So, what to do? We do security engineering. And the idea of what security engineering is predicting all the mistakes before they happen, and then putting certain measures in place to make sure that those mistakes are never a reality. And this is not a new concept. The airplanes that people fly around in, the rockets that go up into space, they have to model all the accidents that can happen before they're allowed to do that. Us? Not so much. We're just like, oh, we can do this cool thing. Let everybody have it. And then there's a whole lot of mistakes, and we're like, oh, wait, take it back, take it back, take it back. We need to fix it. And I think this is really dangerous the more AI becomes more and more powerful, right? We don't want to have the same incident where we have this atomic bomb. We don't actually understand the implications of what that means. We drop it on the city, and when we want to take it back, it's too late to take it back. And if we reach a point of AGI or the singularity and we want to take that back, and it's too late, and we haven't engineered for it, then that is a problem. And so I was thinking of 3 stages of security engineering, right? And the first of these is personal. So we all know that humans, that bias is inherently human. Ooh, okay. So the first of these is to come to terms with your bias. You should be able to say, I have racist tendencies, I've identified them, and I'm working on them. And a nice way to check this out is through the implicit association tests. You should do them regularly because your biases change according to your current context. You'll find that probably 70% of this room has kind of like a bad racial bias, even if you're black. Then another thing is get involved. Make sure you're friends with the people that you're designing things for. At least know about them, where they come from, and how your system might affect them. And then the third is hold your bosses accountable. So if your bosses are not implementing ethics and bias regulations within the workplace or in your research lab, then you need to go to them and be like, we need a change. So the next step is then in the developmental phase. And in the developmental phase, we're looking at things we can do to make sure that the machines we create or the data that we collect is not used in a way that we don't intend it to be used. So the first of this is an ethics tool. There are multiple ethics tools. They're Python packages. You just download them. I know this is an added extra headache onto already there's so many headaches there is about obtaining data and doing data science. But you can get an ethics tool, and I'll speak about that in a little bit. You can also get bias tools where you can analyze the bias within your model and the data that you're using. And then the third one of these is to compile a data sheets, model data sheets, which is a concept proposed by Timnit Gebru. And how this works is you have your model, you have a data sheet, which I will explain, and then a model data sheet, and you package it all together, and that's how you deliver it. Yay, we're protecting against ethics and bias infringement. So, for example, ethics tools, there's ones provided by the Ethics Guidelines for Trustworthy AI by the EU, and it looks at the following traits. I'm running out of time a little bit, so I'm going to speed through that. But it gives guidelines such as this. So you just go through these guidelines, you look at your system, and you do a checkbox. Check, right? Did you ensure that there's a stop button? If the singularity arises, is there a stop button if it decides that we need to die? Did you assess potential forms of attacks, and did you prepare for them? This includes things like adversarial examples. So putting a sticker on a stop sign, is that going to make your self-driving car crash, you know? What harm would be caused if the AI system makes inaccurate predictions? If it makes mistakes, what is the consequence? Have you avoided creating unfair bias in your system? And is the AI system usable by those with special needs and disabilities? They often get left out of a lot of the things that we create. So this is just an introduction to the bias tools. I suggest to use this one. It's a really good tool. It shows where, what features that your system is using the most in terms of the weight of the decisions it makes. And this one is an African diasporan, so you should support him. This one's by Google, and there are also a whole lot of other bias tools that you can use, and you can use them with simple pip installs, so it's really easy process. Then the next is data sheets for data sets and models. So these are the types of questions that should accompany your data set, and you should have answers of these questions so that the next time somebody uses your data set, they know exactly why it was created, with what measures it was created, and if they use it in their system, what your biases will be injected into your system. And that includes things like the motivation, the data collection process, pre-processing, distribution of data, and legal and ethical considerations of your data set. And then, of course, for your model checklist, that would count as your model data set. And then the last level of this is on an institutional level, which I can imagine that not many of us here in this room have a lot of control over. But that doesn't matter. This lady over here, her name is Joy Boalamweni, and she created a system in which people can join a community to try and bust bias. And she also has a couple of initiatives in which a community is able to come together to stop bias, even if you don't have a lot of say in terms of policy and what goes on a corporate level, for example. So spreading awareness through organizations, through talking to your friends, talking to your colleagues, that's a really important thing. Then the second, of course, is policy and laws. South Africa has the POPIA Act, which protects privacy, and then the EU has just, the due date for the GDPR was this last March, and so everybody's scrambling to be in accordance with that. And that one's really cool because That one says if you interact with any place in the EU, so if you're selling products there, if you're using products from there, you have to comply. But again, these are mostly talking about protection and regulation, not so much about ethics and bias. And then, of course, the Obama administration also put in an investigation in 2016. So if we can continue in this direction, that would be really great. And if you have any influence within government, anybody in this room, then it is up to you to go and talk to the right people. And then another point is open access to quality education. Let's get everybody onto the same leveling field, and then diversity won't be so much of an issue because we have everybody representing in the problems that we face. Access to the nerd world by other organizations. I mentioned in the panel yesterday that we should have people from humanities here. We should have people from politics, from business, from all the faculties. They should be here all together making these decisions with us, learning with us, and having these important discussions. And then also open access to resources so that we can do our jobs. I just had to put it in there. And then the last of those is the wide adoption and training in regards to security engineering practices. There's a funny thing someone sent to me about Russian hackers and engineers in the Putin, I can't remember, in the era before this one. None of them were given ethics training, and it was on purpose, so that if they were asked to do an unethical job, they would just do it without any questions. That's not cool. We can't do that anymore. Everybody needs to go through ethics training. So just quick summary. We've looked at bias and what that means. We looked at ethics and what that means. We looked at security engineering on the personal, developmental, and institutional level. And my final words to you are Kapela unga sabi. Go forth with caution, but don't be afraid. Thank you very much.
Firstly, I'm really glad that you did this talk. It's super important, and I hope that we have more like this in the future. My question is, I guess, a little bit metaphysical, which is sexy. But I guess when we're coming up with like AI ethics and the frameworks for implementing it, it kind of has the assumption that our existing framework of ethics is correct, and a lot of it is super outdated. It's by philosophers who are long dead and not at all representative. And so do you think this is an opportunity to, I guess, improve upon the already existing framework, or do you think it's time for us to kind of just tear things down and start from the beginning?
I think there's a start, right? I mean, there's a reason why these philosophers had so much time to think about these things. They didn't have much else to do. So I think there is some value in the findings that they had and the lessons that they have to teach us. So I think this is a stage where we need to be updating on ethics and things like that. And with the institutional changes, I knew I had left things out, and that's one of the things, is reviewing the processes that we currently have and reviewing the rules and regulations we currently have. And yes, the EU has put forth an ethics guideline list that I mentioned earlier, but that doesn't necessarily apply within the African context. So I think it is really important for us to develop these things a lot further and to pay more attention to them and do a lot more investigation. But my concern at the moment is that everybody just needs to get onto the same page, you know? I think what often happens is people take a lot of time developing the thing, and it means that a lot of stuff comes in under the radar, and yeah, so I think my main priority for now is to try and get people to be aware, and then we can all be part of the discussion about how we can come about with better rules and regulations.
Sorry.